I recently purchased the brand new Sigma Art 35mm F1.4 DG Mark II, and in the last month or so, I've been using that lens pretty extensively, and here's some samples of what I got. Welcome back, this is Luca, and if you follow this channel, if you know me, you know that I used to hate on 35mm lenses. So why did I end up spending almost €1,000 on a brand new 35mm lens? I guess it all started when I reviewed the 35mm F1.2 LAB from Viltrox, video that you can find over here, because that lens blew my mind, and I guess it started my healing process. It started my appreciation process towards the 35mm focal length. But for as much as I love that lens, I consider that lens to be too big and too heavy for my type of usage. So when Sigma launched this brand new 35mm lens, I ended up consuming hours of content on YouTube trying to understand whether that was the lens for me. And every review was super positive, super appreciative of this lens, and also on paper, this lens checks all the boxes that, in my opinion, a professional 35mm lens should check. And before talking about the lens, just be aware that the entirety of this video is being shot on that lens, so you're not gonna see it in my hands that much. And unless you're seeing the lens on the screen, the entirety of this video was shot with the Sigma 35mm f1.4 Mark II. Now, enough introduction, let's just talk about the build quality of the lens. From a build quality perspective, this is a very solid lens. It is made of high quality plastic. It's called polycarbonate, but it's plastic, and it's what you would expect from a Sigma Art Prime. You get all the typical Sigma Art Primes features that you get on a lens. You get an aperture ring that can also be de-clicked thanks to a switch on the side of the barrel. And speaking of switches, you have another switch that prevents you from going into the automatic position or prevents you from getting outside of the automatic position when you're moving your aperture ring. Sony would call it an iris lock. This is the same thing. And you also get a autofocus, monofocus switch and two custom functions button on the barrel of the lens. And you get also a pedal shape hood that is very narrow. It's barely bigger than the barrel of the lens itself. Now, I consider that to be a positive thing because in my backpack, it doesn't take too much room. For comparison, the mushroom-sized lens hood that you get on some Nikon lenses are humongous and take a lot of space for no apparent reason. This one is the exact opposite. It takes the least amount of space you can possibly imagine. Although some have complained about the fact that it's not that easy to then put the cap on the front of the lens if the hood is on, or if you want to operate with filters, it's very narrow and you don't have a lot of movement inside. I don't personally mind. I don't fiddle with the front lens that much when the hood is on, so no big deal for me. I really appreciate saving room in my backpack. The other thing on the hood is that you have that click button, so you gotta remember that whenever you want to remove it, you just have to click that button and then the lens will come off, the lens hood will come off. If you don't, and if you force it, you risk to break that little piece of plastic that keeps it in place. So not a big deal, but you need to know. From a size and weight perspective, the Sigma Art 35mm Mark II is very, very similar to the Sony G Master 35mm f1.4. basically the same size and basically the same weight. You see it on the screen compared to the 24mm G Master because that's the lens that I had. The 24 is very similar to the 35 G Master, and the Sigma is very similar to the 24. So they are very, very similar. And Sigma is basically going after Sony when it comes to size and weight. They know that Sony has put a lot of effort into making their lenses smaller and lighter, and they're trying to follow the same path. And I believe it's a good idea. And I won't lie to you, the size and weight played a pretty big role in my purchasing decision. We're going to talk about that later when we compare it to the Viltrox 35mm LAB. And with that size and weight, the good thing is this becomes, with my A7V, my A7RV, it becomes easily a one-handed setup that I can use with no issues. And if you know me, if you follow this channel, you know that I tend to appreciate when I can use stuff one-handed, because sometimes you need to hold the reflector, you need to hold the flash, you need to hold something, or you got to give direction to someone. Having your left hand free is important to be effective in doing your works. A bigger package would get in the way and would make me feel the fatigue on my wrist a lot sooner than I do with my A7V, A7R5, and the Sigma 35mm F1.4. Now that combination of size, weight, features, build quality, it's all great, but if the lens is not good optically, it just doesn't matter. The good thing about this Sigma Art 35mm Mark II is that it's optically exceptionally good. It is very sharp, wide open in the center, and it's also really good in the corners when it comes to sharpness, wide open. And it gets a little bit better as you stop down when it comes to sharpness. At f2.8, you basically have corner-to-corner sharpness, high sharpness, corner-to-corner, even on a 61 megapixel sensor. Of course, when it's wide open, you see some vignetting, although it's not that dramatic, and it goes away as you get to f2.8. And the lens is very sharp even at its minimum focusing distance, which is nothing to write home about. It's not a macro lens, but if you want to use it for some close-ups, the lens doesn't lose its quality just because you're shooting at its minimum focusing distance. And this is something that you don't always get with these lenses. So very well done over there as well. But where Sigma has basically mastered lens manufacturing is in minimizing glare, flare, ghosting, and stuff like that. Because even shooting an entire portrait session basically backlit with the sun in front of the camera, I could barely see flaring and I could barely see a little bit of ghosting. You're seeing it magnifying right now, but again, this is the worst that I could find. And that says a lot. That is an incredible performance. Flares and ghosting control like that, you don't find it that easily. On top of that, when it comes to fringing and chromatic aberration, again, this lens is just spectacularly good. You can't find any sign of chromatic aberration or even loca. I couldn't find it. And the lens retains its sharpness at least up until f11, but it's very usable even at f16. And once you stop it down to f8, f11, f16, you also get very nice sunstars, which is not something you're going to do all the time with a lens like this, but in case you need it, they are there. From a bokeh standpoint, the bokeh is really good, it's nice, it's smooth, it's very progressive, but it's not magic. I don't know how to say that. You could expect something more magical out of a 35mm f1.4. And this is probably the lens being so perfect to a fault. But we're going to talk about that later when we compare it to other lenses. All in all, however, from an optical standpoint, you can't really complain about anything with this lens. And I also prefer the color rendition of these Sigma lenses compared to the Sony G Master ones. But that is more of a personal preference than an objective fact. When it comes to autofocusing, this lens autofocuses really fast and really reliable. Now, I have missed some shots here and there. Among thousands of shots, I have had some missed shots, but both in video and in photo, that was more of a user's error than a camera or lenses error. So if I have to give it a grade, this is an A plus lens when it comes to autofocusing. You basically can't tell the difference with a native Sony G Master lens. And that says a lot. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind is that, like all third-party lenses, this lens cannot access to a couple of things. If you're sporting, like me, the A7V, you can get to 30 frames per second with that camera, but not with third-party lenses. So you are limited when it comes to the burst shooting to only 15 frames per second. But when it comes to a 35mm f1.4, this is usually a portrait lens, a street lens if you want. It's just that kind of usage, and in that kind of usage, I don't think you're going to be using more than 15 frames per second at all. From a video standpoint, I've been using this lens with my A7V a lot. It has been, ever since I purchased it, it has become my YouTube studio lens. You've seen that I went from a wider setup with the 24mm G Master to this one. And this lens is great for video from every aspect you're looking at it. Autofocus is really, really good. The color rendition is really good. The optical performance is really good. And I forgot to mention this in the photographic department, but this lens seems to have a black mist filter incorporated in it, because when you have a strong source of light, you get a little bit of a haloing that is not too much. It's not getting in the way, but it's adding some additional punch to the image that I personally like. At least 95% of the time, I like that type of effect. As I mentioned, the autofocus performs really well. I had some occasions where the focus drifted to other subjects. Again, user error more than camera or lenses error. And with this size and weight, the lens is not stabilized, but with this size and weight, it's a perfect lens for a gimbal setup with the A7V, and I use it a lot in this commissioning ceremony that you're seeing snippets of right now. It worked really, really well. Also, when it comes to video, I love the fact that with the 35, you just with the click of a button, I can go to APS-C mode and go to 50mm. I have two different perspectives, and the lens performs really well in both occasions. The other limitation that I was mentioning before, and it's related to video, is the fact that this lens doesn't have access to the focus breathing compensation that the most modern Sony camera have. That is just for Sony original lenses, and it's fine, because in this specific case, this lens shows a little bit of focus breathing, but it's not that much, and it's not distracting at all. If you're looking for it, you're going to see it, but realistically, you're not going to see it that much, and it doesn't distract from what you're doing with your camera. So I have zero issue with this lens. I actually love using this lens for video because it gets me everything that I want. And on top of that, the focus transitions are pretty smooth. Of course, now you're seeing it, it's pretty fast. For my YouTube, I put it in a very fast way, but it goes to the subject quickly, but it's not crazy distracting. It's very smooth in the transition between the subject and the background, and back and forth. Really nice lens when it comes to video. And so in conclusion, this is a great lens. No matter how you look at it, for $1,000, €1,000, you get an incredibly good lens, a professional tool that is going to get the job done. It's not going to get in the way, and it's going to be there for you for a long, long time. But in the $1,000 range, there's a lot of choices that you can look at, and you may have a doubt. Should I go for the Sigma or should I go for the competition? When it comes to the competition, if you take away the 35mm f1.4 that are on the cheaper side, meaning the Sirei Aurora or the Samyang, I haven't tried none of those, so I cannot speak for them. They are cheaper, way cheaper. If we stick to the $1,000 range and try to focus on the top of the line stuff, you get the Sigma that I purchased, you get the Sony G Master 35mm f1.4, and you get the Viltrox LAB 35mm f1.2. So why did I choose the Sigma over those two other options? Well, the situation is pretty simple. When it comes to the Sony, there's one reason and one reason only why I picked the Sigma up versus a used G Master 35mm, because the price, again, would be the same. And that is focus breathing. As I mentioned before, Sony lenses have access to the focus breathing compensation, so it shouldn't be a decision-making factor. However, it is well known that the Sony G Master 35mm f1.4 the focus breathing in that lens is just atrocious. And while it's being compensated by the focus breathing compensation, that function cannot compensate for the entirety of it, which would not be an issue. But the big issue is that it crops in a lot. So you go from a 35 millimeters to a much longer focal length, probably something around 45 millimeters or something like that. The Sigma, on the other hand, considering it's got the same weight and the same size, has a much more controlled focus breathing that you can't compensate in camera, but it won't forces you to crop in that much. So since I'm planning to use this lens for video a lot, like in this scenario, the G Master would be much narrower, making it a crammed situation rather than a very well, I guess I hope, very well set up situation. That difference there would be a big problem for me. And that's why the decision making between the Sony, a used Sony, and the Sigma was pretty easy. On the other hand, in the new market, for $1,000, you can get the Viltrox LAB, which I reviewed already in this channel. And that lens, that is the lens that blew my mind. And as I mentioned, it made me change my mind over the 35 millimeters focal length. But that lens has an issue, and that issue is size and weight. And while the size, like, you could live with it, the weight itself is a pretty big difference, because that lens weighs almost double of the Sigma 35mm f1.4. And yes, that is an f1.2 lens. This is just an f1.4, so I'm leaving half a stop behind. But as I mentioned, for me, being able to handheld with one end the camera and lens setup is an important factor, because I want to have my hand free, my left hand free to do other stuff if I need to. So despite the fact that I loved the rendering that Viltrox lens gave me, I started thinking about size and weight, and the decision was pretty easy. However, after using the Sigma for more than a month, did I regret going for this lens compared to the Viltrox? Because the Sigma, as I mentioned, is a clinically perfect lens, while the Viltrox has a lot of punch. And that character, you can see that in the pictures. The rendering that I get out of the Viltrox gave me that wow factor that I'm not getting out of the Sigma. And it's not because of the sharpness, it's not because of the sheer aperture difference, because yes, f1.2 blurs the background more. Even when stopped down, that Viltrox lens has a rendering that the Sigma doesn't have. Do I regret going for the Sigma over the Viltrox? The answer is pretty simple. It's a yes, but also a no. This is because I have my brain telling me that the Sigma is the best choice, and my heart telling me that the Viltrox is the best choice. And I still haven't decided whether I should follow my heart or my brain. The Sigma lens is just phenomenal. It's just that it lacks that little bit of character that the Viltrox lens has. I hope you liked this video. I have a little goal for myself. I want to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It would be great if you could subscribe. You would help me grow in this channel. It would go a long way into helping grow in this channel. And of course, it costs you nothing. However, that was it for today. Ciao, grazie, and I'll see you in the next one.